Whilst I'm not celebrating having brain cancer, I am celebrating the fact that I'm still here. I did not think that 3 years ago I would still be sitting here relatively well, living my...
She thought she had years left. Instead, at just 39 years old, everything changed with a diagnosis so devastating it forced one of Antiques Roadshow's brightest stars to walk away from the career she loved. For years, millions watched Theo Burrell bring extraordinary antiques and forgotten treasures back to life with her warmth. But away from the lights, a silent battle was unfolding that almost nobody knew about, one that would eventually change every part of her future. How did one of Britain's most respected antiques experts go from a thriving television career to facing one of life's cruelest challenges before turning 40? Stay with us as we uncover the remarkable and deeply emotional story behind Theo Burrell's heartbreaking battle. A life built around beautiful things. Theodora Helen Burrell was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, on September 1, 1986. A fascination with historic objects and fine craftsmanship started remarkably early, leading to a connection with the Edinburgh auction house Lion and Turnbull that began during the teenage years, long before any television camera ever showed up or any national audience existed to watch. Formal education followed that same passion in a very deliberate direction. An MA in history came first, followed by an MLit in decorative arts, both completed at the University of Glasgow during years spent balancing rigorous academic study with hands-on experience inside a working auction house. Ceramics and glass eventually became a genuine specialty, the kind of expertise that takes years of hands-on study rather than something learned overnight from a textbook alone. By the time most people finish building an entry-level career, an already respected reputation inside the auction world had been firmly established through countless hours spent examining, cataloging, and researching objects most people would simply walk past without a second glance. That expertise, paired with a natural gift for making complicated history feel accessible to ordinary viewers, eventually caught the attention of producers looking for new talent to join a beloved, long-running television institution. A single phone call in 2018 was about to turn a respected auction house specialist into a familiar face inside homes across an entire country, though nobody involved at the time could have predicted just how much that same face would come to mean to so many people in the years that followed. Joining the team of experts on the BBC version of Antiques Roadshow in 2018 introduced Burrell to a much wider audience almost overnight. Unlike some television personalities built entirely around performance, genuine expertise carried every single appraisal, mixing real scholarship with an obvious, infectious love for the object themselves. Viewers responded to something simple and rare, a specialist who treated every single guest and every single object with equal curiosity, regardless of whether an item turned out to be worth £800 or $80,000. That same warmth eventually became a defining trademark across years of appearances filmed at stately homes and public parks throughout the country. Behind the scenes, a full and demanding life continued running alongside television work. A son named Jonah arrived in 2020, born into a partnership with longtime partner Alex Lever that had already been building steadily for years before that. Career success and a growing family arrived together, forming the outline of an ordinary happy life still very much in progress. Nobody watching those Sunday evening broadcasts had any idea that a health crisis was already quietly forming, one that would change absolutely everything within just a couple of years. Winter of 2021 marked the beginning of a slow, confusing decline that would eventually reshape every part of Theo Burrell's life. What started as persistent headaches gradually became something far more alarming. Vision problems appeared without warning, sickness became increasingly frequent, and an intense pressure inside her skull refused to go away. The symptoms built steadily over nearly 6 months, becoming more disruptive with each passing week. Looking back years later, Burrell described them as classic warning signs of a brain tumor, symptoms that, in hindsight, seemed painfully obvious. At the time, however, they were far more difficult to connect to a single, life-threatening cause. Like many people facing rare illnesses, she sought medical help repeatedly, hoping for an explanation that would finally make sense of what was happening. Several appointments with a general practitioner brought no clear answers. The symptoms were treated individually rather than as part of a much larger picture, leaving the underlying cause undiscovered as the weeks turned into months. It was an experience shared by many families dealing with uncommon cancers, where vague symptoms often resemble far more ordinary conditions, making an accurate diagnosis exceptionally difficult during the earliest stages. Everything changed during a visit to the Accident and Emergency Department at Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. An urgent scan was finally carried out, revealing what no one had expected to find: a 5-centimeter tumor deep inside her brain. The discovery came almost by accident, ending months of uncertainty in a matter of minutes, while replacing unanswered questions with a reality far more frightening than anyone had imagined. The shock of that moment remained vivid long afterward. Burrell later recalled struggling to process the words being spoken by the medical team. The diagnosis itself felt strangely unreal, as though it belonged to someone else's life rather than her own. It was not until the following day, during a detailed conversation with a neurosurgeon, that the full gravity of the situation finally became clear. Only then did she fully understand what the scan had revealed: the complexity of the tumor and the difficult road that lay ahead. That delay between hearing devastating news and truly comprehending it reflects an experience many patients describe after receiving a life-changing diagnosis. The mind often needs time to catch up with a reality that arrives without warning. At just 35 years old, Burrell suddenly found herself confronting questions no young parent expects to face. At home, her 1-year-old son waited, completely unaware that his mother's world had changed overnight. Plans that once seemed certain were instantly replaced by uncertainty, while ordinary routines gave way to hospital appointments, medical discussions, and impossible decisions. Only months earlier, life had appeared to be moving forward exactly as expected. Now, the future had become impossible to predict, and a battle she never saw coming was about to begin. 12 to 18 months. June of 2022 brought the diagnosis that every previous hospital visit had been leading toward. Doctors confirmed that Theo Burrell had glioblastoma, a grade 4 brain tumor and the most aggressive form of brain cancer. The news immediately transformed months of uncertainty into a frightening reality. Along with the diagnosis came a prognosis that was equally devastating. Medical specialists estimated she had only 12 to 18 months to live, a time frame that suddenly cast doubt over every plan she and her family had made for the future. For a 35-year-old mother with a young son, the thought of missing birthdays, first days of school, and countless other milestones was almost impossible to comprehend. Treatment began without delay. Surgeons operated to remove as much of the tumor as they safely could from the right side of her brain, knowing that complete removal was impossible because of the nature of glioblastoma. The operation marked the beginning rather than the end of an extraordinarily demanding medical journey. Recovery from brain surgery was quickly followed by months of further treatment designed to slow the disease for as long as possible. Chemotherapy soon became a regular part of daily life. In total, Burrell underwent 17 separate rounds of treatment, each bringing its own physical and emotional challenges. The long months that followed were marked by exhaustion, uncertainty, and the constant cycle of hospital appointments, medication, and recovery. Yet even while enduring one of the most aggressive treatment programs available, she was still trying to preserve some sense of normal family life. Raising a toddler left little room for rest, and the ordinary responsibilities of parenthood continued despite the extraordinary circumstances unfolding around her. The diagnosis also exposed the harsh reality of glioblastoma itself. Even with advances in modern medicine, it remains one of the most difficult cancers to treat successfully. Survival rates have improved only modestly over recent decades, and the disease continues to carry one of the poorest prognoses of any common cancer. Burrell soon learned another deeply troubling fact. Brain tumors claim more lives among children and adults under the age of 40 than any other form of cancer. Yet historically, they have received only about 1% of national cancer research funding in the United Kingdom. For many patients and families, That disparity has become a source of growing frustration, raising difficult questions about research priorities and the urgent need for greater investment in treatments that could improve future outcomes. For Burrell, those statistics gradually became far more than numbers printed in medical reports or research papers. They represented the reality facing thousands of families navigating the same diagnosis with limited treatment options and few reasons for optimism. In time, that imbalance would become a cause she felt compelled to speak about publicly, using her own experience to highlight a disease that many believed had remained overlooked for far too long. Faced with a prognosis measured in months rather than decades, Burrell refused to define her future solely by the timeline she had been given. Instead of simply counting down the months, she chose to focus on making every day matter, beginning a fight that would prove far more determined than anyone could have predicted when those first devastating words were spoken. Choosing hope over fear. For many people, a diagnosis of glioblastoma would have marked the beginning of a quiet withdrawal from public life. Theo Burrell made a very different choice. Rather than disappearing from view, she decided almost immediately to speak openly about what she was facing. Through interviews, radio appearances, and regular updates on social media, she transformed an intensely personal medical crisis into an opportunity to educate others. Her willingness to discuss the realities of brain cancer with honesty and clarity helped thousands of people better understand a disease that had previously received little public attention. Instead of allowing the diagnosis to define her in silence, she used her voice to bring visibility to a condition that too often remained misunderstood. One message appeared again and again throughout those years: survival itself was worth celebrating. Burrell never tried to portray brain cancer as something positive or inspirational in itself. She was careful to distinguish between the disease and the life that continued despite it. In one particularly memorable reflection, she explained that brain cancer was never something to celebrate, but being alive certainly was. That simple perspective reshaped the way many people viewed her journey. Rather than measuring life only by years remaining, she focused on the value of each ordinary day that she was still able to experience. As time passed, everyday moments became milestones with entirely new significance. Watching her toddler gradually grow into a young boy became a source of profound gratitude. Family birthdays, wedding anniversaries, quiet evenings at home, and celebrations with friends all carried a meaning they had never possessed before the diagnosis. Events that once might have passed almost unnoticed became reminders that she had already exceeded expectations. Each new memory represented time that doctors had never been certain she would have. Burrell was equally determined not to hide the darker realities of living with terminal cancer. She spoke candidly about the fears that accompanied the diagnosis, particularly during the earliest months after receiving her prognosis. Among the most painful was the possibility that she might not live long enough to see her son celebrate his second birthday. Even imagining his first day at school had once felt painfully uncertain. As those milestones gradually arrived one after another, she reflected on them not as guarantees, but as deeply cherished gifts. Being able to say that those early fears had not come true became one of the achievements she valued most, something no prognosis could ever erase. That balance between honesty and hope resonated far beyond viewers who knew her through Antiques Roadshow. Patients living with brain tumors, their families, and complete strangers found encouragement in her refusal to offer false optimism, while also refusing to surrender to despair. She became more than a familiar television expert. She emerged as a trusted voice for a community searching for someone willing to speak openly about both the hardships and the possibilities that existed after a devastating diagnosis. Standing beside her throughout that journey was her longtime partner, Alex Lever. Their relationship had already weathered the ordinary challenges of life long before cancer entered the picture, and the arrival of their son Jonah in 2020 strengthened those family bonds even further. Once Burrell's diagnosis became part of everyday life, however, marriage took on a far deeper significance. It was no longer simply a future plan. It became a symbol of hope, commitment, and determination in the face of extraordinary uncertainty. On March 28th of this year, that long-awaited wedding finally became reality. Family and friends gathered to celebrate a day that had once seemed painfully unlikely after the original prognosis delivered in 2022. The ceremony represented far more than a marriage. It stood as proof that life had continued beyond the timeline many had expected. Photographs from that day captured moments of joy that only a few years earlier had seemed almost impossible to imagine. Barely 4 months later, Burrell's remarkable journey came to an end. Looking back, those wedding photographs carry an emotional weight few could have anticipated at the time. Yet those closest to her later emphasized that reaching that day was itself a profound victory. Marriage and motherhood had once appeared uncertain dreams after her diagnosis. Living long enough to experience both, and to share those moments with the people she loved most, remained among the achievements she spoke about with the greatest pride throughout her extraordinary journey.